They laughed at the 80-year-old grandfather in the department, and when they saw the photo of his son, they turned pale. The neighbors were making noise all night once again. Pietro Ivanovich knocked a few times at the front door of his young neighbor, in vain. It seemed that they only became more active. He even heard his landlady laughing drunkenly in the neighbor's apartment. Then loud music started. Pietro got up from bed with great difficulties and put on his robe. With a shuffling step, he went to the landing and rang the neighbor's bell. "What do you want, old man?" she asked after opening the door. "Zetka, it's 2 in the morning," he answered wearily. "I can't sleep. You're too noisy." "He can't sleep," the young woman shouted into her apartment. A big lug appeared at the door. It was Svetlana's boyfriend, who drank and partied with her several times a week until the wee hours of the morning. "What's the problem?" he asked Pietro. "Hey, man, why don't you take a sleeping pill? With vodka. You'll sleep like a baby afterwards." Svetka laughed, Sasha grinned, and they slammed the door in Pietro Ivanovich's face. The old man finally shuffled back to his apartment, took a sedative, and pulled the blanket over his head. The partying people apparently disturbed only him, because the other apartment was empty, and the landlady was herself a guest at the party, while the old couple below was deaf. He was 80 years old and had no strength left. Svetka and her boyfriend also threw cigarette butts at his front door, but his complaints to the landlady were not heard. She let them get away with everything. That night, Pietro slept only after he had taken the sedatives. He dreamed about his family, his wife, Natasha, and his son, Sergei. Natasha died more than 20 years ago. Her heart could not stand the grief when they received the letter with information about the death of their son. From childhood, Serozha dreamed of being a soldier. He was athletic and studied hard to qualify for military school. However, he did not score high enough to go to school. However, he did not give up. Finally, they gave him a chance, and he actually joined the military, even though his mother tried to talk him out of it. "What's going to happen? The time of the great warlike conflicts is over," he told his mother. But then everything turned out differently. The war broke out over the Crimean Peninsula, and Sergei was ordered into the middle of the action. At first he wrote letters, but then nothing. Piotr Ivanovich went to the military registration and recruitment office to find out at least something. There they first reassured him that hearing nothing was completely normal. Then, a few days later, the doorbell rang. A military representative was at the door. "I'm here to see you," he said, covering his eyes. "I have to inform you about the death of your son." He stammered something about "died heroically," defending his position. Everything went black. Your only son, pride and hope, dead. Natasha was taken away by ambulance that very evening, and the next morning she passed away. Her heart could not cope with the death of her son. The former teacher, Pietro, is not really lonely, since his former students come to visit him, and even the press came by once to do a portrait of his son, the war hero. He has resigned himself to his present life. Everything would be fine if his neighbor did not behave so outrageously. She had no decency at all. And yet her mother, Katerina, had even been friends with Sergei. Pyotr Ivanovich remembers seeing Katerina and his son walking in the park. Natasha and Pyotr thought they were going to get married. And then suddenly Katya was married to a businessman, and soon after she gave birth to Svetka. Natasha first thought that she was Serozha's daughter. It seemed to her that the girl looked like her son. But when they approached Katerina about it, she became very angry and didn't want any more contact. She didn't even come to Natasha's funeral. And 2 years ago, Katya and her husband were in a car accident. Svetka became an orphan. The latter continued her maternal traditions in the form of her behavior toward Pyotr Ivanovich. She did not greet him. She behaved ruthlessly toward him, as if she enjoyed it. Yes, he had called the district official for disturbing the peace, but that was only twice, and that had resulted in nothing. But one evening the doorbell suddenly rang. Pyotr Ivanovich had just dozed off nicely. It was Svetka. "What do you want?" he asked her. "I need a corkscrew," Svetka replied drunkenly. "I don't have one, but I'm going to call the police if you make noise until the sun comes up again," Pyotr replied. "Oh, and here I am afraid. As if that would do any good, old man," laughed Svetka contemptuously. He then asked her what she had against him. She answered that she only wanted his apartment if he died. Then she and her boyfriend would own the whole upper floor. "You're not going to make it much longer anyway, you old goat." Threateningly, she staggered toward him. Startled, he closed the door and decided to go to the police the next morning. No sooner said than done. Pyotr wanted to make a statement and finally put a stop to Svetka. But the police officers at the station dismissed his descriptions as the delusions of an old man prone to exaggeration. They wanted to send him to the doctor to get new medication. After all, they had already been to his home several times and could not detect any abnormalities on the part of his neighbor. Pyotr was desperate and demanded to speak to the station chief. He heard the commotion outside his door and finally left his office. Pyotr was visibly agitated, and the precinct commander wanted to call an ambulance because he suspected a heart attack. "I don't need an ambulance. I have my medication with me," Pyotr said gruffly, searching in his wallet for the medicine bottle. As he did so, the picture of his son in uniform fell to the floor. The precinct commander saw it and turned white as a sheet. "Do you know this man?" he asked Pyotr. "Yes, of course. This is my son, who died in the war," Pyotr replied in surprise. "Do you know that I owed your son my life?" the precinct commander asked. "He threw himself on a hand grenade that had landed in the middle of our group to save us. He laid down his life for us." Both men were moved to tears. Finally, the precinct commander took a lot of time with Pyotr and recorded his report. He even sent someone to look into it and put Svetka in her place. This is exactly what happened one evening. Svetka had tried to intimidate the old man again, but she had not reckoned on the police officer standing behind the door. It finally turned out in an interrogation that Svetka was indeed Sergei's daughter, and had learned this from her mother shortly before her death. She would have had the right to his apartment after Piotr's death, But Pietro knew how to prevent this by bequeathing his apartment to a charitable organization in his will. Svetka, on the other hand, came away empty-handed. Coincidences always happen. This story teaches us that we should always help vulnerable elderly people because you never know what we have to thank them for. How would you have reacted in Pietro's place? Feel free to leave us your comment.